Thank you. Good morning. It is so amazing to see you all here. We built this studio last year, and this is the first time we've had this many incredible people in here, and it really is such a privilege. As summer winds down, many of us have been really squeezing out some of those last moments of summer with trips to the lakeshore, maybe to Saugatuck, to some national parks, into the forest, and really into these areas of nature, maybe with the cooler temperatures, wearing a hoodie, getting in some longer walks. I want to bring us back to that space. So before we begin, think about how you felt before entering whatever that moment was, whether it was going to the beach, being able to walk along the lakeshore, walking along the beach, or even just a nature path here. When we go to these spaces, you might even notice that there is a little bit of you that can either watch the flickering leaves for hours, you can watch the waves roll in a seemingly endless sort of trance, or even if you're sitting by a fire, there's this seemingly soft fascination where we can tune in and have almost like you might even sigh, your shoulders drop. There's this bit of a restoration. And I want to say that if you have noticed that, it's not just your mind, that actually is your nervous system responding to nature. So today I'm so excited to share a little bit more about biophilia and biophilic design and how we bring a little bit of that restoration and design into the built environment, into homes and offices all around West Michigan and beyond. Your nervous system was scanning this room before you entered. I guarantee if there wasn't the foresight signs and the friendly faces, your cortisol might have spiked, right? And then you walk into this room, I think there's, hopefully for most of you, you came in and there's a little bit of a sense of an ease. An exhale that can occur when we're able to look at nature and have some of these different elements in here intentionally to support us. So what we do in biophilic design is really bring in those elements of nature in which you can get that support from outside into our home environments. My name is Maria, and I am the co-founder of Foster Spaces. We are a plant design studio based right here, and the reason we do this is because of the data behind biophilia. So plants are beautiful, yes, but the impact of them is very measurable, and you're going to notice a big difference. So I'm excited to share a little bit more today on how you can use this either in your work and through your restoration, but more importantly too, in the way that we live our everyday lives moving forward. Biophilia is really something within us all. So if you go to wherever you're going, if you're across the country in another part of the world, if you go into a park, you're going to find people engaged in a very similar sort of activity. There's a soft relaxation that's occurring. People are intermingling. There's almost like this default state that we can go into, a sense of relaxation. And so we didn't evolve in cubicles or inside these rooms. And so the reason we use biophilia and biophilic design to design it in is because we spend over 93% of our time inside. And so, of course, we can feel that release and that effort and just a little bit more of a calmness when we go outside. But the reason we do what we do is because we understand that where people spend the most of their time and where they're truly spending their day-to-day lives has such an impact on how they perceive their work and the stress responses to all of it. So, biophilia is really something within us all, and it's something really, I think it's something we've all had this like assumption. We know, we see this, if we have a hard conversation or a long day, there's this natural inclination to go on a walk or to really lean into some of these spaces that can really support and enable us. And so biophilic design has been something they've been studying for over 50, 60 years, and there's some really incredible people in the industry. Through that application of biophilia into the built environment, people have really started to understand and analyze what happens to people when they're outside. So what are some of these impacts that we're having when we're at the shore? Why is it that when we're having a hard conversation and we go on a walk, it feels a lot more fluid? Or after all these long days, we can really restore ourselves with just the simple sight of green or some rustling sounds of water. So Some people that you're going to find when you look into biophilic design is going to be Terrapin Bright Green, and they've done incredible research on really analyzing the impact of what it is that happens outside and how we can bring it in. And so for that, they've really done so much research and starting to really summarize it down into 3 different categories of how we can bring nature into the built environment, into our homes, and into our lives. The first of them being nature in the space. This is going to be what you're going to see directly a lot of throughout this space. So it's going to be in green walls, adding in fountains and water elements, adding in the standalone plants. A lot of these things we do when we bring them inside, we find that people have that same level of restoration. So all it takes is 40 seconds, and you can have a little bit of time with any plants or these natural elements, and we're all going to have a seemingly very similar response. The second being nature of the space. So this is going to deal with the way that you interact with the environment and when you walk in. And so this is like if you walk into, I know some of you may have been to Hayworth, if you walk into a big building or a lobby, when you walk in and you're able to have a wide view over the environment and decide your way to pursue through it. That really calms us. That gives us a sense of prospect. We can see where we'd like to go and we can determine our path. There's also examples of refuge, and this is going to be like a cozy little tucked in enclave, or maybe it's that booth at a restaurant where it seems like everybody wants the same spot. And the third being natural analogs. So I know Fernando is going to talk a little bit more about this in his talk on regenerative design. But natural analogs is really when we bring in the elements of nature in, but in a little bit more of an abstract way. So this is going to be using the wood elements, but when you use them, making sure that you keep the live edge. Or if you're deciding in some of your fabrics, choosing in something a little bit more natural rather than a polyester or something derived from plastic. These are all very simple adjustments that we can make that you may not even realize the level of impact that we're having on them and how much it can really benefit the full life cycle of the product. And so it can seem really complicated. There's 15 patterns of biophilia, and they're all very different. And so for the sake of this, I'm not going to dive into deep. I want to speak to the top 3 and understand how all of this really does impact people on so many different levels. So when you bring in plants or any of these biophilic elements, it's all about finding the true intentional intersection of all of them in a way that really supports the occupants of this space. So it's not like everything is the same solution. We all have different parameters, different ways of solving around it. And I think it's within understanding and really being able to dive deeper into the patterns of biophilia and understanding how each of them do different things for us. For example, the sound of water. It's one of the big 3 sounds for us as humans. So water, rustling leaves, and birdsong. If you're having a hard day or you're just needing to recenter, these are simple things that we can add in and just listen to that really do make a massive difference in our lives. So the impact is really what brings us here, and I'm sure if you heard my path, you'll understand I'm a little bit more of a data nerd than a designer. The reason we do what we do and the reason we are so intentional in our pursuit of doing it is because of the impact that it has on the people. We have had the honor and privilege of being able to work on a variety of different projects, and the impact is always a little different, but yet it's the same. We find that when you bring in the biophilic elements into the environment, people are able to think a lot more clearer. In the classroom, people score higher. You don't have to do anything different, and people are going to have a greater level of succeeding. Stress levels lower. We're able to really see a measurable difference in blood pressure and your cortisol within 4 to 5 minutes. Like, these are very measurable differences. And so the reason that nature, I think, can play such a key role for us and why it seems like such a seemingly simple integration is because I think when we look back, we'll see our ancestors, we'll see our parents, our grandparents, and we'll understand, like, okay, yes, we've been able to do a lot more work. We've been able to maybe curate some of these environments to support us a little bit more. But we almost have forgotten that we're going from controlled space to controlled space. We're spending so much of our time inside, and without that effortless time in nature, we're not going to be able to have some of those impacts. We've got a lot of different things that can arise within us, and it's really monumental how much just lowering your stress can really lessen other things and just offer even clarity of thought and accuracy. There are some really incredible people doing amazing things in this field. To highlight just 2 or maybe 3, I'd like to first talk about Dr. Aruni Bhatnagar. He is a cardiologist. So he basically has been studying the correlation in the data between where trees die, people die. Well, the thing about data is just because there's correlation, you can't assume causation. So he took upon himself, leading a project since 2018 outside of Louisville, and they have targeted the highway where there hasn't been any trees around it. So on both sides of the highway, it's a lot of people who don't have as many of opportunities or in a lower income bracket. And what he did is started to understand and study the mortality rates of this area. They studied the biodiversity. They're adding in all of these sensors and all of this with the key intention of planting 9,000 evergreen trees along the highway. And so the way that they've done this is in a very tiered offering, similar to a forest floor, where you see the smaller shrubs first, and then it gets a little bit taller and a little bit bigger, because they've been able to study the way that the forest forms, and that is exactly how we can extract the most carbon emissions and all the pollutants. So they've been leading this project. There's 9,000 trees, so if you drive through Louisville, perk up a little bit. But also, the measurable impacts are insane. It's been since 2018. The study is going. It's going to be a lot longer. They hope to continue for very, very many years. Mortality rate is declining. Everybody's out and about more. Mind you, these are trees that people can't even see. They're only on the other side of the barricade for the highway. All the measurable impacts, they've had a major decrease in blood pressure for all the occupants and the people of the area. And truly, it's really just one of those things that the health benefits are really coming out, but the community differences are very measurable and seen right now. A second is Ty Farrow. He's an architect. He is the first Masters of Neuroscience applied to design and architecture for all of Canada. Stellar guy. His whole view is really understanding and applying the biophilic patterns in a way of constructing health. So we know 8,000 causes of disease, but we know 80 causes of health. Why not run with that? So he's been taking that to some of the environments where most people, where I guess fatality rates are really high and where people need the most support. So he's been designing a lot of cancer clinics all over the world. He's currently in the process of designing the largest cancer clinic that also has the largest botanic garden attached to it, with hospitals offering or giving off 2 times the gray water of any other building. They're able to water the full botanic garden with the water from that, and also really curate a space for people to come back to and feel enabled. And lastly, for another great example, has anybody been through Portland recently? Looks like we have to plan a trip. So the Portland airport is a beautiful example of place. And so for this, they really were intentional on understanding the different types of people who go through on a travel day. So they're understanding the family with young children. They're understanding the business traveler who's going to have to get through security and hop on a call. They're understanding the disabled person who's going to have a little bit more of an inability in some areas, and really mapping out all of the stress levels of these people to design in biophilic interventions throughout. So if you walk through the space, what you're going to notice is as you wait for security, the TV screens are going to show seasonally aligned views of what's outside in Portland and the area. And the screens are going to be moving at a pace. You're not going to notice this, but it's all within the data. The screens are moving at a pace as if you were going yourself walking through the natural environments. Throughout the entire space, they've designed it so there's literally spaces and really intentional interactions for people to be able to gather and rest and feel a little bit more ease on their travel day. And I think what I find so inspiring by all of these is understanding how you can use nature as a solution and support so many people. So many people come from all different walks of life, And if we're able to bring in nature and really enable them, it's like, why not? So for us, the reason that we do this is because when we install a plant or do an installation on a Friday or a Saturday, by Monday, we're hearing from the people who are the head of the building being like, wow, there's a noticeable difference. And so for us, it's really truly the impact of what the design can do. And I think I understand none of us are, or maybe not yet, going to design airports or reconstruct cities, but we can start small. And what the simple thing is we can bring in some of these elements, and there's so many different ways that we can support ourselves. As we go into fall and winter, I know some of us can feel a little apprehension towards the clouds coming in, a little bit less inviting of weather outside, but nature has the same benefits. We can use nature as a tool. When we try to reach higher and do more things, we have to use our time in nature as an enabling attribute for us. When we have those big meetings or those calls, it needs to be as an ingrained part of us being like, no, this is so important to me, I need to go take a walk first, right? There are very small adjustments that we can make that really have a measurable impact. And so after today and just being able to talk about this, my only hope is that you feel and you can view nature and your interaction with it a little bit more intentionally and just understand how much it truly is here to support us and enable us in everything that we're doing. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you. Thanks for having me this morning. Super excited to be here. Yeah, so this is a stool, right? This is something we've seen a ton of time. But how we kind of talk about this stool is that it's a vessel that carries a bigger story. And it carries a story about regenerative design and exploration. So, like he introduced me, I'm Fernando Ramirez with Common Object Studio. What we do is we work with companies to evaluate, what are their strengths, what are their capabilities, what are their goals, and we create a strategy and an action list to pretty much help them achieve that. When we first started our studio, we knew we wanted to be value aligned. We're about 4.5 years old. We knew it was going to be a value-driven studio, so at the time, we were really working in two areas, and that was community. So how do we really understand how it impacts people? And then it was sustainability. We were working with a lot of materials that were in the industry already, but just applying them to product, much like most designers do. What we added when we started our studio was exploration. It was saying, hey, we come across a lot of great materials, but we never get to use them because they're not quite ready. And they're not quite ready because the systems weren't grown. They were just sitting there, right? They were inactive. Great ideas, but nothing showing how it could actually become something larger. So we had to bring in that exploration side really large, really big into the company. Now I'm here to talk about regenerative design a little bit, and I'm going to talk about it through our case study, Okatera. But to give you a summary of what regenerative design is, it's can an object in its creation give back more than it takes? Can it support people? Can it support planet? So that's kind of like a really generic example of what regenerative design could be. But a really great way I love thinking about it is if traditional product is here and regenerative design is here, sustainability is often neutrality. It's often in the center. And as we do better, right, as we think of people more, as we think of planet more, we start to move towards that center goal. But oftentimes anyone who works on these things, you know how hard it is to hit that center, that bullseye. So if we could aim a little higher, right, we can create pathways to regenerative objects. So that's kind of what we do. We don't ask everyone to be purist and push and push and push, but we have to have real strategies. We have to have real pathways to regenerative design. So you could see that as we push, we really start to do less harm to the people on planet as we get to that, we approach that regenerative. So as much as we love working with companies, we knew we needed to do a case study, and that's really what I'm going to show you today, is Okatera and how we approach that. So the way Okatera started was saying, okay, can we put our values to work as a studio? How far can we really push sustainability? And with that, like every good designer, we ran out, did a lot of research, and said, okay, what systems are really accomplishing that? And we came across regenerative agriculture. Luckily, my partner came from farmland, so he's like, "Well, let me go call Bob down the street and like see what he knows about it." So we started interviewing these farmers and like understanding what regenerative agriculture actually was, and when it's put to work, and like just like we do with companies, right? Understanding what's the hardship, what are the struggles there, what are your goals, things like that. So we started investigating deeper into that. And what we came out with is like, oh, they're just struggling to make it. They're doing good, but they're not really getting a lot of benefit from it. So how do we start to support farmers? So we started to see one problem. Can we create something that supports farmers? At the same time, we both come from contract furniture. We were looking at all these ESG reports. We were looking at these sustainability goals. For designers, that's usually not a place they look. But we were trying to say, okay, well, what are they going to be looking for 5 years in the future? What can we hit? So we had these two areas we knew we wanted to go after. Okay, we need to supply to these companies, and we need to support these farmers. And then there also in there was like, how do we bring more people into this? How do we make sure the people manufacturing are taken care of? How do we grow the area we're in? So we found nonprofits to work with also to do job training for the furniture we were going to make and what we put in there. So this is just a framework. This is not a thing yet, right? This is just thoughts at this point. So we're like, okay, so now we have this rough idea of a system. So how do we narrow that down a bit and look at the object itself? So we created a framework for our chair, this ideal state, right? We weren't sure if we could hit it yet. And we said, okay, first, it needs to sequester carbon. It needs to increase biodiversity. Second, it needs to support those farmers. If they're doing good, we need to help them continue. Maybe they tell their farmer friends, hey, you should do this. They're paying us. Third, we need to grow the circular economy. What I mentioned, why we kind of started, right? Because the circular economies, they stay stagnant. They don't grow often. So we need to invest in that to help grow. And fourth, at the end of life, this at the least needs to turn into nutrients. That means no harmful chemicals. That means no harmful finishes. That means it needs to come apart very easily. So we had this framework. Can we make a chair? At this point, it was a chair, give back more than it takes. So we went in there and once again, dived right back into the partners that we already started talking to, the ones who didn't trust us yet, and which, why would a farmer trust a boy who's never been on a farm, right? It's like it was very foreign for them to say, I want to make furniture out of your waste. So what we found really was a few areas. On the farm end, we found a lot of waste wool. It's a common problem. As we investigated, it's everywhere. This was in Baltimore area, in Pennsylvania area we did this. We're doing this in Michigan now. Indiana and Michigan, same exact problem, no different. So a lot of waste wool. Really valuable wool, but just stuff you wouldn't want against your skin. Then there's the really good wool, right? The regenerative wool. The stuff that's a little more expensive. So we started setting up a network of like, oh, we could actually make textile out of this. So we on that side, we knew what we were doing, but we're like, well, what are we going to do? Just make pillows? Like, it's just wool. So we started investigating deeper into the area, and we found fallen lumber, something that's been around a long time, mostly bespoke pieces. But we asked, how do you do that at scale? What's stopping that at scale, right? And most of the time, it's because when you crack one of those open, you don't know what you're going to get. So we said, well, what if designers, if we start to embrace the natural variation of the wools, the natural variation of the lumber itself, if we really start to switch how we think of that and say, can we embrace those things and can we design for them? Is it the guardrail that helps us get to the goal? So we started working through that. And really what we found is a lot of this was really beautiful. The stuff that probably wouldn't be found at most places, the wormholes, right? How do we start to frame that? We really started thinking of all that. So we knew we had that. We were also a few other materials. We were helping a company scale on the common object side. We were helping them scale their bio leather, 100% bio leather. We were working with a hemp farmer to try to get some rope going. So we had all these things. And about a year in, we finally had all the materials I think we could actually do what we were trained to do, is design a chair. So we dove in, we designed a couple chairs that embodied all of that. And we went to ICFF with it to show people and asking a simple question: can the future of furniture be regenerative? Can we really get there? And we often like to say, this is a pathway to regeneration. Because it's not regenerative yet, really, right? It's neutral. It's like I could confidently say, we're not certified neutral yet, but I could confidently say this is probably a neutral product with a pathway to regeneration. The more we could scale the system, which I'm not trying to get you to buy stuff, but the more we sell, that's how regeneration happens, right? It gets the gears turning. It grows that circular economy. It gets everything going. So, that first time out is we got a lot of great attention from very large companies like Gensler, like Space Smith, a lot of these people who gave us their time then and said, let's have bigger conversations. Let's share what we know with you. That way you guys could get some bigger guardrails. And that was great. Like we went in, we got to meet a lot of great people. We got to refine the idea, especially with our chairs. Our pad was like this thick because it was all wool when we started. Now we can achieve something this thick. That's a lot more comfortable. The first chair had a hemp suspension underneath it because it didn't have bounce because of the wool. Now, we can achieve comfort without that hemp suspension. So, over 2 years, it really has advanced a lot, and it's all exploration, right? So, part of the reason I'm here today is for these little tables, to go back to them. So these are the numero 1 and 2. They have a declare label on them, which Foresight, we partner with Foresight. They're really wonderful to teach us how to actually do that. And part of that is just the education, right? Once again, taking somewhere designers usually are not, and let it create guardrails for you. Let it create understanding so you know how to redo this for when we go to clients. So it's really all about putting our nose where it doesn't belong, I think, at the end of the day. So with that, we achieved our first declare label, I think it was in May. Really proud of it. We're continuing to work with Foresight on not only these, but just kind of thinking, how does this relationship really work? How do we make bigger impact in design? Because I really think if we can go back to what Common Object really says, is if we could think about the systems around an object, it's really the only way I think we can get to regeneration. So that's the Okatera story. Thanks for hearing it. And I hope you could take some of, as you learn about it, I hope you could take some of this and put it into your own work, into your own companies, because it's really the framework why we made it, so that we can keep using it again and again. So thank you.
So I guess I can start with just an overview of the level process and a little bit of the relationship. Yeah. SRG, which is Wendy and I for 11 years now, 12 years or so.
Early part of those days.
Yeah.
Early part of those days.
And was intimately involved in writing and directing the original kind of level standard, and that was pre my existence. Pre my involvement.
I'm old enough to be part of it.
Yeah. What I was trying to point at is that Steve was involved from a very early time too in BIFMA. So the level standard, and I don't know where to start in this piece, but it's a product, multi-attribute product standard that has really evolved to set like product certification and product sustainability, both in the furniture industry, but I think from my own experience, really has done a really good job of just trying to explain what sustainability looks like from a certification standpoint for products, which is a little bit different than what I think, I came from the construction and lead space. And it's different because products are made on a continuous basis, right? And there's processes and systems that Fernando talked about that don't exist when you just make a building, right? And you put it out there and then you move on to the next building. And I think like kind of as we kind of go through this, that has been a little bit of the genius of the standard itself. And so we've kind of seen this evolution over the last 12 years in different versions of it, and we've all kind of been involved of it in different parts. And the last one came and was published in May.
Yeah,
May. And I think Steve can speak to some of the really relevant aspects of that, but I think the idea that it's multi-attribute, which means that it's not just carbon, right? It's not just chemicals. It kind of encompasses all of these pieces is really relevant. The idea that it, I like to say, like, in order for a product to be sustainable, it needs to be made in factories that are run sustainably, right? It needs to be made of materials that are certified as sustainable, and it needs to be run and gone through organizations that treat their employees in a sustainable manner, right? And so the pillars of kind of facility and organization and product are really relevant to a product standard that might change and when you're looking at just say a building or something like that. So. I don't know, Steve, do you want to kind of speak to the actual standard itself? Because I feel like this is probably more of your expertise.
No, but you did a great job of the overview. Thank you. So, yeah, I'm Steve Coy again, and been involved with the standard from the beginning. There were many, many people before me who were really over it. At that time, I was a bit younger and a little bit more like just providing a little insight now and then. But the 2024 version is our 6th iteration of the standard, and a fairly major overhaul. So we were talking about this before, and I want to thank these 3 and many others for really putting the standard together. So my job as BIFMA is to kind of help get everyone together and have that input. Do want to be clear that since the beginning, we had EPA involved, we've had Gensler involved. I could go through the names, USGBC, you mentioned LEED. So it is a very interactive process. It's a very inclusive process. Really anyone could get involved. So we were happy to have a large group of people. The standard itself, though, again, major revision in the sense that it went through the process of going from a credit-based system. So if you're familiar with LEED, you basically chased after points. That's not a bad thing. It was just, hey, if I can get more points, I'll get gold, silver, whatever. Now it's now based on criteria per level. So level standard, as it sounds, 1, 2, 3, 4 is now that 4th one, by the way, is new. Used to be 1, 2, 3. Have the 4th one, but you must hit certain items for each of those levels. And that's extremely helpful for the market, right? It was the #1 thing we heard when I went out as BIFMA, kind of the neutral party, to go out and talk to, again, the architects, designers, owners. They were like, yeah, great, Steelcase got level 3, or Miller Knoll got level 3, but I have no idea if they have an EPD. I have no idea if, as mentioned, declare label. If they've kind of gone down that road of declaration around chemistry. So now it's like, okay, if you're level 3, yes, you have this. Or level 2, you have gone through your chemistry. Level 4 being the #1, or the top, first of all, extremely difficult. Do not plan on speccing level 4 or even achieving. I say this with people, the manufacturers in the room, to get that right off the bat is going to be really tough. But the bottom line is it's meant to be a very high bar to kind of shoot for. So that's where you're going to see the EPDs, planet positive, actually kind of more of that regenerative piece that we just heard a minute ago. So those are some of the main things. We do think it's going to be also simpler. That was another piece that we wanted to put out there, is we felt like there was a bit of busy work and or work that people are not, it's now table stakes. Like companies are doing this thanks to Foresight and others. They're getting this type of work done. We didn't want to necessarily give you credit for that. You should have good policies. You should have a number of things that you're doing, measuring material efficiency. Now we're just saying let's raise the bar and focus on the things that are more action-oriented and outcome-oriented. We all know that there's that journey piece, but we want to push the action side as much as possible.
Stepping in, I think one of the interesting things too that we heard at Foresight. So we work with a variety of different companies and different size organizations, and one of the challenges was how do I, as a smaller or medium-sized organization, compete with the larger guys that are out there that are pursuing all of these different levels within BIFMA. And I think this new standard and the update, especially with BIFMA level 1 and how they're approaching it, is going to give that on-ramp for companies who are just starting to approach their sustainability journey, or companies that are don't have maybe the same resources that some of the larger organizations have. How can they get into the space of sustainability? How can they start moving towards that journey? And that's where that level 1 really starts to come in and is different than in the past. Allowing just a little bit of that ease of transition.
One of the ways that played out, though, that was a little bit tedious in the discussion piece was like anytime we talked about any new requirements, you had to step back, right? And Steve kept saying this. He's like, we always start every conversation with a history that goes back 10 years. And you're like, we got to this point because we thought this was easy and this was hard. Now that hard is easy, and right? And so there was always a very conscious kind of effort to put everything in context, right? And so it wasn't, 35% recycled content feels like a good threshold. It was, now, I mean, even just those percentages have been removed. So it's, what is hard, what is easy, and how, and as you said, like there's these kind of, everybody has to get the same, do a kind of the same thing across a certain level. If they're already doing this over here, can we also, can this also be, is this easy, is this hard to do in the context of that?
Yeah, and I would also say, like, when you think about pursuing the standard, some of the things that we've seen in the space really is all about being able to navigate the opportunities and find those systems that Fernando started talking about. Is how do we move into more of a systematized space? So, and also take advantage of some of the other standards and certification and efforts that companies pursue in those other certifications and pull that into the standard. So if you're pursuing different types of certifications, say a C2C type standard, how can we leverage that information without necessarily having to have two different certifications in the same space? And I would say the other piece is like, how are we able to pull in those items without having to necessarily identify those specifics when it comes to regulation? A lot of the interesting space around the previous standard was there was a lot of references to like US regulations, and that was all kind of removed to make it very global in nature. So they're pulling the efforts, but they're not identifying the actual regulations, and they're synthesizing it across the globe so that we can like standardize the approach and not make it just so US centric.
And I'll add to that. I got to hear from Brad. See how it's actually going on the Miller Knowles side. So one other thing, though, just to touch on the global piece, we are seeing a lot more interest globally, which has been great, right? We're seeing it from all over the world, really, even as far as Australia and certainly East Asia. Bottom line, though, is we did want to make sure that it wasn't so US-centric, which I think has paid dividends. The other piece, though, to tie in is we are seeing more people use it for the Amazon Climate Pledge Friendly program. So if I'm sure you all use Amazon, and if you ever look, no matter what you're buying, a lot of items now will have a little Climate Pledge Friendly symbol there. And there's about 30 certifications, level being one of them, that if you hit this certification, you can actually get that badge. And one thing I want to say here, because I work with Amazon a lot now because of that, ultimately they are raising the bar too. So they said, level 1, version 2019 was okay. Now we're going to go to level 2. And they're deliberately making sure that it's very few products. So it's not like a lot of certifications where they're like just kind of chase and they want thousands and thousands of furniture products. They actually want to keep it limited and kind of keep raising that bar. But from my perspective, it's all fun. I'm the theory guy, right? You're putting it together, you're trying to help, and by the way, I'm just kind of facilitating that. These people are doing the work, we're putting it together, and then ultimately it's how does it actually play out in reality?
Yeah, how do we actually apply this to the products? And one thing that I think we were really intentional about when writing this standard was trying to remove like the point system or giving people extra credits and points for meeting thresholds, right? Of 30% recycled content, 50% recycled content, or not having, these Annex B chemicals in 99% of your product. And although that may seem at first counterintuitive, if we look at it more on a guardrail system of what should we actually be studying in our products, both circularity, recycled content, and chemistry both sound great, but those two can inherently be at odds with each other. The more I hit that 50% recycled content in my product, the less I know of my upstream sourcing of my materials. So I don't know if there's any contaminants in that plastic, versus going to BASF and saying, give me your formulation for this. So those two don't really play well together, and you almost had to choose at one point in the last standard. Do I want to go full circularity, or do I want to go full chemistry? Now, the way we've set this up, more of just know your recycled content. You're not getting extra points for hitting thresholds. And just know the chemicals in your product. You won't get anything until you get that level 4, which is supposed to be tough. So we removed that kind of, different thresholds and pushed it to a more holistic net positive for your product, where that level 4 is going to land.
Yeah, I think there was a recognition of how hard it is to actually know a lot of this stuff, and in recognition that as Fernando's doing his work and pushing the bounds of what's possible and what's expected. The people who actually do the effort and the companies that do the effort to find their that knowledge and that data will set themselves up to follow the pathways that kind of in those systems that are being created in real time, and then the kind of the higher thresholds of some of these other aspects of the of sustainability become easier, right? But the first threshold is really just an investigation in the materials, the products, the chemicals, the data around your facilities. It's like we, theoretically think all of that should be super easy, right? We think, companies should know what they're buying from their suppliers, but if anybody is trying to collect that data, that is maybe harder than it should be.
And as we know, in the last couple of years, it's changed even more dramatically as far as knowing where your suppliers are.
Yeah.
I was just at another conference last week, and it is surprising how few people, different group, I won't say the name or anything like that, but literally when someone said, hey, do you know where your wood is coming from? Very few people know. I think our industry is much better off, by the way. That's the good news. But yes.
Well, and that's one thing that I always say that Danny and I talked about a long time ago, is just how, this standard and this industry coming together around this standard, it has been, from a perspective, leading the charge in and around sustainability. There is not another standard that's associated with an industry. And Danny and I disagreed with this a long time ago, and I think I've brought him around to this concept about how much, in the space of manufacturing, how this certification has really pushed this industry forward in sustainability faster and farther than other industry sectors.
Yeah, to give context to that, I'm not from West Michigan, I'm not a designer, and I cared very little about office furniture. And I have a degree in building systems engineering, and I wanted to design HVAC systems. And when Wendy and I first started working together, the idea that a furniture industry or a furniture standard could be, the forefront of sustainability was just antithetical to anything that I, held dear. And I spent, 5 or 6 years learning the standard, working with companies to do this. Still not convinced. I'm just like, well, there's got to be something better. And visited a couple other sustainability associations like sustainability working groups. Specifically, the one that stood out was the outdoor industry. And I walked in, And the language that BIFMA was using and had been using for 10 years was like the words that a lot of these companies were just starting to understand, right? And that's the outdoor industry. You think, you got Patagonia and you have REI and some of these companies that, tout sustainability, but that was sustainability as a company, not sustainability as a product, right? And I think this is the fundamental difference here. And they were doing the same thing, trying to define this like product, governance, and facility organizations. You have the Higg Index is moved from the textile into the outdoor industry and adopted and changed names over the years. And it still, I would say, is still steps behind the level standard in terms of how it's defining chemical transparency and how it's defining some of these things. So in the last couple of years, I relented to Wendy and told her that she was ultimately right. And yeah.
So now you tip over chairs like I do to see who made it?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, good.
Right.
Then you've become one of us. That's how that works.
And I think what's really important about staying and dictating its own standard is a lot of times we see sustainability metrics, right now especially carbon, is being driven by the architectural and the building industries. There's buildings everywhere. There are huge carbon sinks, a lot of materials. But at some point we need to fill them with things. That's where the office furniture comes in. And how many times and I'm looking at Steve for this because I know you deal with this all the time, have we seen a report from an architecture industry saying the carbon footprint of our product over the 60-year lifespan, 80% of it is from the office furniture that goes inside of it. And they're trying to almost force us to play by their rules without understanding our supply chain, our processes, what we do every day. So it's really important for us to kind of put our foot down and define what we see as sustainable, because what a task chair might look like versus structural steel is very different. And we're still trying to play in the same sandbox. So this is where I've seen, as you mentioned, how far ahead this industry is. It's almost because we've had to, because of where we're being put in the larger scale of sustainability.
Anyone who is part of the standard writing has heard Steve's Garage, but I'll explain that in a minute. So section 4.5 is supplier assessment. And what's going on in our industry, so I'm going to go back to the history Danny started with. 10, 15 years ago when people were thinking about this, basically manufacturers really did make most, if not all, of the product. And in some cases it was coiled steel, so vertically integrated all the way to end product. Fast forward to today, you have a lot more people assembling product and possibly even really just barely touching the product. And it goes back to what Danny started with. We wanted to make sure the standard kind of stayed with its integrity, which was like you can't have a product from we used to say a brown factory, unsustainable, like they don't care about their people, et cetera, et cetera. So what we did is instituted 4.5 and said that if you are getting more than 40% by weight of a component, so think like an entire bottom of this chair, if that's more than 40%, if task chair makes even more sense, or the legs of a height adjustable table, then you need to go out, you as the manufacturer, so it'd be Miller Knoll in this case, just because you're right here, would go out and assess that supplier and make sure they're doing the right thing. Because I do have people who call me, and that's why it was called Steve's Garage, was just, they would say, well, I just grab components off the internet and I put 2 or 3 together and I sell it. And it's like, okay, do you know who's doing this? Is it children? Is it, what's going on? And, they're ordered on the internet. They're good. They're ISO certified or whatever. And so we wanted to make sure there was a little more teeth into that. That's really what it is. So to answer the question, it all comes down to that 40, by the way, it's not commodities. We make that very clear in the standard. So if you have a piece of wood, or say you've made a table and it's got a big slab of marble on it or something like that, that's a commodity. That's just a raw material. But if it's a large component like I just described, and it's over 40%, then you, the manufacturer, you, the brand, if you will, the applicant, will go out and actually assess that supplier. So it doesn't have to be the third party. So we didn't really get into that, but I think most of you understand it's a third party assessment, which will be like a UL, Intertech, SCS, the list goes on. But ultimately, they're not doing it, it's the brand that's doing it. So like a Brad or one of his team would go out and do that.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, so, examples, you said pulling off the internet. Some of the other spaces that we see this happening is kitting. So we see, companies that, get a fully packaged box and all they're doing is adding a second box and putting a strap around it and then sending it off. And so they really don't have a deep understanding of what it takes to manufacture that product. And so they want to be able to pull some of that data and have a really strong understanding of who they are in the supply chain. Look at some of those there's a codes of conduct section for the suppliers to be able to develop systems to better navigate the sustainability throughout the supply chain, not just that end final assembler that's putting it together and kitting it.
What else you got?
Wendy, you mentioned the updated standard offering a better on-ramp for small and medium businesses. Can you explain that a little bit more and what that looks like?
Yeah, great question. Thanks, Katie. So the on-ramp, BIFMA level 1 is more of your baseline policies and procedures. So how is your organization structuring the governance around itself? And developing structures and policies to put in place to be able to start guiding that sustainability, having it both top down and bottom up. So they're looking for policies around the environment, policies around energy, policies around health and safety of employees, policies around the supply chain and getting that supply chain involvement in place. So that policy space is that first on-ramp in the process. And then identifying your products. So what are the products that we're looking at certifying? How are they organized? How are those products structured? Looking at bill of materials. So more of the basic information about the organization and how it's structured.
Yeah, I think kind of the way as we were developing a lot of the criteria for the different levels was level 1, very policy-based, paper audits, more or less. Level 2 is quantifying the impacts of your processes and your products. Level 3 was transparency of those impacts, posting them publicly. And then level 4 obviously is optimization and then net positive of those impacts.
Yeah, I think that's a good simplification across the whole thing. So it's like an awareness and then to action.
How does this new level standard connect to like LEED?
I feel like Steve gets that question a lot. So
No, it's all good. So it's okay. So to explain before again, there was a prior to the this new standard, you would get credits and they would match to LEED, and that was intentional. Now again, LEED has changed too. So if you're not familiar, LEED is coming out with their version 5. It's I guess out, but it's still kind of in a pilot stage. Either way, we are working with them. We're probably going to be the second or third rounds. They're adopting what you'd call a product scoring matrix, so that they can grab information from everything from carpeting to ceilings, you name it, furniture included, and look at level as well as some other standards that you could choose and say, okay, it meets these points. So we're working with them directly. Eric from Doyle, sorry, wrong Eric. From Steelcase and I have been working with them for about 6 or 8 months now. He's been even longer. Just making sure that we can score that system with our level 2 or level 3. We've filled that out and we'll probably have at least points in just about every one of their categories. Certainly material health or the chemistry side. Certainly the carbon side, they are looking at rewarding EPDs, things like that, and even just life cycle assessments, and then the social responsibility side or the social impact side. So yes, there is going to be a very direct correlation there. They're actually very excited for the same reasons we just talked about, that, oh good, now we know if it's level 3 you've actually achieved these things. Before that wasn't the case. More to come on that, more to come on their side, but I did want to be clear that that whole LEED process, as they work through things, I just talked to them last 2 weeks ago maybe, that we're kind of in the second or third batch, so it's going to be a while before that comes out officially.
Yeah, if you want to go on that, because I was going to go back.
Question.
Okay, I would love to jump back for a second. Something, about the different tiers of the levels. And just thinking about it from the approach that Foresight has supported our customers through the process, in this current standard, the 2019 standard, the focus for the approach, for us at least anyways, was, when you started with level 1, this is the basic, as much of the organizational structure as we can get. And then going from level 2, we were focused on more the life cycle impacts. How could we get some of that data around the product itself to pursue level 2? And then level 3 was all about the product chemistry, because that's kind of the biggest challenge to generate that information. Now, if you look at this current standard and make some comparisons, you're starting to pull some of that product chemistry into the level 2 space. So, and get that material ingredient information and connect it to the bill of materials. So that is, like trying to enhance the standard and continue to progress companies forward, but making it possible. So it's almost like splitting that product chemistry space from our previous approach, which was all around in that level 3 space, because it was so hard to generate that data, and pulling, kind of splitting it up, getting that material information more in level 2, and then pursuing that transparency. And so this is really, providing information on your product publicly and being very transparent around it, which is not something that was ever part of the current level standard that it is in this new standard going forward in the 2024.
Yeah, and part of the reason that we did want to include some of that chemistry data in the newer, level 2 section is not just to make the standard hard for being hard, but because we see people asking us for that data. So we're trying to help companies be proactive and say, if you're level 2, you should be able to respond to Harvard, to HHI, to anyone asking about the 6 classes, like chemical groups that we are very much aware of, and we know our customers are asking us for.
Yeah, I think to speak to that, and that was kind of the question I was going to direct to you, Brad, is like the way I think, or maybe you can speak to the way that has been split, because you talked about like policies, right, is kind of level 1, and level 2 is a little bit of inventory and understanding. And it is a big leap to go from a policy around chemicals to an entire inventory of all of the possible chemicals within your product, right? And so I think there was an attempt, TBD on what everybody else's opinion on it, but I think there was an attempt to make that an on-ramp, right? It was like, Foresight strategy was previously, let's not talk about chemicals until you're ready for level 3, and we're gonna do a big whole effort around it. That's no longer possible, right? We have to start talking about chemicals at an earlier state. Maybe you can kind of speak into what that actually looks like.
Yeah, and we're not, we're making sure that we're trying to keep that on-ramp going. We're not asking you at level 2, give me every chemical that's in your product right now. Right. We're not even really asking you, go ask all of your commodity, suppliers these questions. These chemical classes, it's a class approach. We're making sure, are there any, bisphenols, phthalates, like actual nasty chemicals that everyone's asking about.
Everyone's asking about phthalates.
Yeah.
Does anybody know what that is?
But we as an industry know where these chemicals are in our products, right? Bisphenols, BP, or PFAS. Let's stick to PFAS. Everyone knows about PFAS right now. We know where those chemicals actually apply to our products. So we tried to build this into a way of like, focus on your troubled children first, right? Go ask your textile suppliers where your PFAS are in your products. Go ask your powder coat suppliers. Go ask specific commodities where we know these exist to really start that approach. And then when you set to level 3, now you have to go ask everybody for everything.
Yeah, and I think even just the identification of those materials, right? That's one question I know, Steve, you always get, is around now we actually have, before you would have a representative model, right? And you would kind of do all of your analysis on one product, and it would represent a lot of different products. But we all know that, one product, there's, you might switch in a headrest, an armrest, and different textiles. And so it's very hard to communicate kind of that what the chemical impact of those different pieces are. And now the new standard does ask not what the chemical impact of all of those are necessarily, but at least that you know what all of those different materials are, to your point, because those are associated, the next step after that is then doing an analysis on that.
I think that's something that we haven't even touched on in this new standard yet, is that additional,
Supplemental materials.
Thank you, supplemental materials. So historically, we were able to look at a representative sample and address an entire group or an entire family of products under that representative model. But now if you start getting into the higher levels, we're going to start, the standard asks companies to start pulling in more of those different, features that would be included, the different materials that might be included in some of those add-ons, or the different makeup of the different products that are represented within that group. So they're identifying it as supplemental materials. And so companies have to start adding all of that inventory into the process, into the BOMs that they haven't had to do for past certifications.
Yeah, no, and I mean, just to be clear, I mean, really, even in the higher levels, but certainly the lower ones, it really is like Legos. I mean, I'm a Lego guy, so it's like you get your building blocks, and then you have your additions. And those additions are just something that you're going to look at as well. So that chair right there, that everyone's sitting on a chair here, most. And maybe that is wood today, and then it has a different finish, or tomorrow it's plastic at the top. Okay, just add that plastic, list it out, and make sure there's nothing, or what's in there, again, if you're going for a higher level and you've assessed it. I think pretty practical, and the reality is I've been in a lot of manufacturers around the world, really, for furniture. And people generally have, it might be a very big Lego box, but it's still somewhat contained. They're not just going with whatever. Specials we're not talking about, by the way, like if you're doing a really customized version. But ultimately, it's those options, those headrests, those armrests. You have a foam, and then you decide to have a gel seat bottom, whatever the case might be, as far as a cushion goes. So it's really, that was the second thing. Sorry, number one was always kind of like, what does each level represent? The other one was from kind of people that were asking about the standard was, how's that one product kind of cover 50? Yep. And the reality is, in a lot of ways, I'm like, well, no, honestly, they use a lot of the same pieces. The design might be completely different on the outside, but internally it's the same. But to their point, there are some differences.
Any other questions?
My last question was supplemental materials, so you guys are.
All right.
Well, I mean, I guess, to the group, y'all came for a reason, either to hear something or not, to meet someone. What is the, think about what are the things that you wanted to learn or wanted to know about. We're very good at going off topic, so happy to.
And we can talk life cycle assessments.
Yeah, happy to go in a
Declare
lot of
labels
different
anytime.
directions. Or just not talk about furniture.
You should always talk about
Okay. Cool.
Go for it.
So I'm just curious about like adjacent industries. We've talked about, say, office furniture, commercial being kind of, still maybe in the forefront, which is fabulous. How do you see this new version of the standard possibly opening doors to, sort of furniture in different applications or other furniture industries?
Well, that's an interesting question.
Here, and I'll take this in a different direction, but I think from Foresight's perspective, a lot of our own thinking around sustainability and product certifications is aligned first to the BIFMA level standard, right? So when we think about life cycle assessments, we think about the PCRs and all of the other stuff that BIFMA does. When we think about circularity, we think about it in the context of a lot of what BIFMA does. Same with chemical transparency. We also work with the automotive industry, we work with food and ag, we work with packaging, and in all of those spaces, kind of how we enter into that with those manufacturers is a lot of what like the office furniture companies are doing and what we're doing for BIFMA level. We use a lot of the same on-ramps, right? Hey, you want to get recycled content on this? First, we got to get a bill of materials and name the different types of materials, and we know how hard that is, right? And so it's not quite a furniture-centric view on it, but I think I know that other industries are, I mean, this language and this approach to sustainability resonates, right? It's not, I don't walk into those companies and they're like, this doesn't make any sense for our industry. Because furniture is, it's lots of different materials, right? It's complex manufacturing. There isn't a single material that furniture, that's used elsewhere that furniture doesn't touch, right? And so if we can name the sustainability version of that, you can walk into, food might be the only other one, but but even that, when you get to kind of regenerative systems, food and ag fall into a lot of the same, certification and kind of processes that wood does, right? And we've seen that with packaging. So I don't know that quite answers the question, but I think that's kind of how I think of it.
Yeah, and just to expand on that, like when I see how the BIFMA standard can expand into other spaces, I'm seeing it expand through the supply chain. So as the OEMs are encouraging and utilizing the level standard, they're having to gather more of that data from the suppliers. So as the suppliers are being exposed to the level standard, we're seeing suppliers starting to engage and want to pursue level certification as well. And because of what Danny described, as this is essentially a standard for any type of manufacturer, even the supply chain partners can pursue BIFMA level. And I would say, on top of that, we've been having conversations outside of specific contract office furniture. So areas like hospitality and residential furniture, we're also seeing pursue BIFMA level, because this is, again, a leading standard, one that's very recognized in the industry, accepted by Amazon, part of the Climate Pledge. So it fits all of these different opportunities for companies to see this as a leading symbol and label of sustainability in the marketplace.
Yeah.
Here's your plug, Steve.
No, thank you. I like that. No, but really quick, that's exactly where I was going to go, is just we are seeing, anyone aware that there's been mergers and acquisitions within the space? And with that becomes more expansion, right? Hospitality, retail, you name it, residential. So it is set up that way with this kind of in mind, not just global, but this idea of expansion of materials, and you hit the nail on the head with the supplier side too.
Yeah, and just as another supplier, one that we've been engaging with too is the textile industry, and they're a supplier to office furniture, and they're trying to align their approaches and align their data, because they're getting so many requests for this data that they want to align to the standard, and looking at ways to be able to do that to support their customers as well.
I'm by no means the expert, Jennifer, but I'm going to steal the last word because I'm the MC and I get to do that. I actually would argue, I think another huge driver that is underrated in furniture is BIFMA is a business-to-business sales organization. And so I think having that, you get a lot more consolidation. If there's just significantly fewer buyers in this industry than in other industries, and I think that drives it a lot. You think about it, like automotive is a way larger marketplace, but it's individuals who buy cars, and so you have to figure out how to get a whole consensus across 30, in our case, like 330 million people in America, and that's just in the US. So I think being business-to-business focused, right, most of Miller Knoll and Steelcase, et cetera's revenue comes from other businesses, is why the standard is driven so much, and why it's such a, I think, a really powerful product standard relative to the marketplace, even though you have so much more dollar volume flowing through retailers, automotive, etc. Okay, well, hey, this has been a great conversation. Thank you all. Let's give our panelists a round of applause.